I would say that like the argument or the conversation that I have the most in terms of movies and TV, because I mean, like, you know, not everybody's like super into it. They have people like there's like what they like, but like Friends. Like when I say to people, it's just like, oh, one of my favorite shows is Friends or whatever, and I say it's just like, you know what, I like Friends. I've watched Friends. I've only watched through it once, and I say like, you know what, I don't think it's as good as the hype. Like I think it's overrated, and people are like, oh, really? And I'm just like, yeah, like I just have some gripes with it that I think are totally justified, and like people just kind of don't.
What are your gripes?
Am I going to go into this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let this be like one of the last times that I get into this, because I feel I've told this story so many times. Because like people like, it's not that they're inclined to not believe me. It's like, oh, here's a person that likes the show, but also has problems. Well, I guess I enjoyed the show. Like it was fine, but it's just like, here's somebody that like goes,
have you seen every episode?
Yes, I went through it once, only once, one watch through, but beginning
once
to end.
Is all you need.
Yeah, beginning to end. But it's just like, oh, here's somebody that like goes against the grain, that has an opinion that isn't just like, oh, Friends, best show ever. It's not. So my big overarching umbrella with Friends is that it lacks depth in being, it always, in pivotal moments, it copped out with a laugh. It didn't offer depth in terms of seriousness, okay? And there's 3 specific moments that I reference that, like, people are like, oh, how? And then I tell them this, and they're kind of like, yeah, I guess so, right? And it's like, no. And that's where I say The Office is better, because The Office could do both, okay? So for Friends, there's 3 parts where they copped out with a laugh, and it bothered me. So the first one is obviously for like 3 or 4 seasons, you're waiting for Ross and Rachel to get together, right? So, and I think...
Which stretches out to the entire season.
Which is like, oh my God, like the whole show. But when they finally get together, I think it's at the end of season 3 or and it trails into like season 4 or something like that. But it's essentially almost like 3 solid seasons of these 2 characters gravitating. Are they going to get together? Are they not? Whatever. They eventually do. But there's that one episode where Rachel's working at Central Perk, right? And she's like closing up. It's the end of the night. It's just her. It's like dim lighting, right? And Ross is just outside the front window, right? And he's kind of like at the window, and she looks back. She's like, oh my God, right? And it's raining. So she like lets him in. And that's where he kind of like professes his love to her. And it's basically just like, okay, we've gone 3 seasons. Let's do it. So then they have this intimate moment of like they're finally getting together. And what do you know? They cop out with a laugh. David Schwimmer says something funny to like break the tension, and the audience laughs, and it's just kind of like, oh geez, haha, whatever. And they're finally together. And it's just like, no, man, I've been waiting 3 seasons for this. It's like, let's be serious and have a real moment, right? And you're like in the real moment for just a minute, and then boom, laugh. And it's like, don't cop out. And it bugged me.
But what is lost in that, like, not having a real moment? Like, that they would have...
This isn't a laughing moment. You've been waiting 3 seasons. It's raining. It's just her. It's intimate. It's dim lighting. Like, let's tell each other how much we want each other and love each other. Like, it's not saying that love can't be funny, but it's just like, no, we've all been waiting for this. Right? And you kind of get the sharing of the feelings, and you're like, oh my God, this is great. Boom, laugh. Like, it just like relieves the tension of this serious moment with a laugh. And I just feel like it copped out on what could have been a serious moment. And if there was no laugh track, and it was just kind of like this moment of just like, you know what? I have feelings for you too. And it was just like, that makes me happy. Or like, I'm glad you feel that way too. And there's no laugh, and it's just silent, and you just sit in the moment that they care about each other. It's just like, okay, there's some depth there, right? But no, they kill it with a laugh track. Number 2
Okay.
is what?
No, I was just going to say your argument right now is exactly like the argument that people complain about Marvel movies for, of like they have a serious moment of like Tony Stark sacrificing himself or something like that, although not that specific moment, but they'll have a joke or they'll have a serious thing and they'll immediately like undermine it with comedy. A moment of like real character growth.
Right.
And then,
exactly.
Yeah.
Real character growth undermined with a laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, number 2 is Monica and Chandler. Okay. Monica and Chandler, when Chandler is, he's like toying with the idea, like he says he loves Monica, and it's just like, oh, they're going to get married, engaged, whatever. It's the episode where Monica flips the script, which I can only imagine in the late 90s, early 2000s was a big deal, that she proposes to him, right? Which, like, whatever, like, times have changed, but like at the time I'm sure like societally that was a bigger moment, but whatever. She proposes to him, which is the thing. Remember, she has like 1,000 candles in the girl's apartment, right?
Great visual.
Yeah, awesome. Intimate moment, lots of candles, dim lighting, right? And then like Chandler's just kind of like, oh, like what's going on here? And you're like, oh my God, what's this, right? Like you're engaged, you're like something is about to happen, something we've been waiting for, right? And then they get together, whatever, boom, Monica gets on a knee and she's the one, oh my God, like it happened. But it didn't happen the way that you expected it for Chandler to be the one. So here's this great intimate moment. Chandler kills it with some side-armed, funny joke, quip. And boom, you get the laugh, relieves the tension, undermines the seriousness. And it's just like, damn it, like they did it again, right? And I was bothered because it's just like, man, like you have these moments, you built to these moments, you manufactured this moment, and you did a curveball with Monica being the one, and it's just like, this could have been great. And we could have sat in the moment where Chandler doesn't say something sarcastic, doesn't say something funny, which is his character, which is fine. But it's just like, had you not said anything and like went the other way, and you could have really made him a real person and said like, you know what? Yeah, like I was nervous. Like I'm happy that it went this way, right? Just to just be like, you know what? This doesn't need a laugh, right? And sit in the intimate moment. Same thing. They cop out with a laugh track, audience, whatever, kills it. Bugged me. Okay. Number 3.
Before you do that, just be mindful not to hit the table so much for the.
Oh, does it bounce? Oh,
I don't know if it bounces, but let's not find it. But like,
let's not find it.
But you can do that. Just try to hit the table less, I guess. Anyway, number 3.
That's me going. So, number 3 is near the end of the series. Ross is in his apartment that's like across the street or whatever from the regular apartment. And he's on a date with this blonde girl, and Jennifer Aniston is pregnant. Okay. So Jennifer Aniston's pregnant, and like, it's been a while, but I think I think he knows, but like miscommunication or something. So Ross has this girl in his apartment, and they're about to go on a date, like they're about to leave, right? So there's this knock on the door. Ross goes to the door, opens it up. It's Rachel's father, and he gets right in his face, and he's like, "Hey, you knocked up my little girl." And like Ross is just like, and you're like, "Holy shit!" And he's like right in his apartment, and then Ross is like, "Hey, what are you gonna do? What do you know?" And like, ruins this moment of like this father defending his daughter. Yeah. Right? And it's just like, like, not to say like, oh, Ross has to own up for what he did. It's just like Ross could have been like, hey, whoa, hang on. There's a miscommunication. Like, what are you talking about? And like, it could have just been like, you knocked up my daughter. You need to do the right thing. And it's just like, oh, Mr. Green, like, I think maybe we should have, a conversation about this, right? But he just like fumbles because there's like this other girl there, and it's just like, hey, let's not get too hasty here. And it's just like, no, Ross, own what you did. Like, own the fact that like this father is mad for the predicament that you just put his daughter into. And you're like, not to say like, oh, you're not being a man, but it's just like, no, like this father's feelings are valid, right? Like, call it old school or whatever you want, but like recognize the fact that this man is mad for what you did to his little girl, right? And he just fumbles it with a laugh.
Yeah.
And it just kind of gets brushed off. So that bothers me because, like, again, it's a sitcom and it's like, oh, don't take it so seriously. But it's like, no, like the show is capable and had opportunities to be serious and to have depth, and it cops out. But then you have
excuse you. Yeah.
So you have The Office, which is funny, like all these great things. But The Office, there were moments of uncomfortability that you're left to sit with.
Yeah.
Right? Like, two examples that come to mind. There's the one cold open where Stanley tells Michael that he doesn't respect him. And Michael, and it's like, that's how
Michael tries to play it off. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, that's like the start of the episode. And it's just like, all right, everybody get in the conference room. And they all start to go to the conference room. Stanley doesn't. It's like, Stanley, get in there. And he's just like, no. It's like, Stanley, stop playing around. Get in the conference room. And he's like, I'm not going. So then Michael tries to like, you know, play it off with a laugh. And it's just like, come on, Stanley, like, you know, let's get this started. And he's just like, I'm not doing that. And just like Michael kind of doesn't know what to do because he's just not doing what he told him. So everybody's like, do we go in the conference room? Like, what's about to happen? So then Michael just like looks and he just, everybody get out. And they look like, what? Everybody out. Right? So all the cast leaves. The camera leaves, everybody leaves, but the camera sticks behind, right? And it's kind of like leaning over the thing. And it's like this totally candid thing that like you almost like forget that like
you forget you're watching a show.
You forget you're watching a show. And he's just like, Stanley, what's the problem? And he's just like, I'm not doing it. I don't respect you. And he's just like, and Michael's like, Stanley, like, look, like if I tell you to do something, you have to do it. And he's just like, no, I don't, because I don't respect you as a man. And he's just like, he's like, Stanley, you might not respect me as a man, but I'm your boss. At the end of the day, like you have to do what I do. And it's just like, what the hell is going on right now? Right? Because it's almost this unspoken rule that we know that Michael could be a buffoon or whatever. And there's those elements of him being a good guy and he really does care. But it's just this kind of like, what the hell is Stanley doing right now? Right? He's kind of saying the thing that nobody wants to say. Right? And this is how Michael confronts it.
So how does that episode end?
I can't remember. You know what? I don't remember what episode that is. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember that cold open because it caught me off guard. Like, what the hell's happening right now? Right? Because Stanley just kind of, I don't want to say stands up to Michael, but he just kind of stands for what he believes, which isn't a wrong thing, but it's like, hey, Michael's right too. Yeah. Like, he is your boss. You got to listen. But it's like, but I don't respect him. But like, that doesn't give you the, like, it really makes you think, right? Because everybody just kind of does whatever Michael says. Yeah. Because it's like, oh, that's Michael. What are you going to do? Boss, right? And then here you have this situation. So there was that. So it offered some depth, right? That it could really turn not only the narrative, but it could really.
How does it turn the narrative?
Sorry, I shouldn't say turn the narrative. It can really like put itself in a pressure cooker. Because it's like, what would happen if one of the characters really did put the gears to Michael and say, like, you know what, this is stupid. What are we doing? It's just like, well, why would we do that? Well, let's put Michael in that situation and see what Michael does. Right? And Stanley does it.
I vaguely remember that situation. I've seen Friends. I watched it when it was on like the last 2 seasons because I was like super young. My mom was a nut for it. And I watched it when it came to Netflix, watched the whole thing like back to front, same as you. So I remember all of those Friends situations specifically. And I must say, that's the first time where I've seen somebody like kind of point out with like a legitimate criticism. That's like a criticism I've seen in other things about being too serious.
You almost want to say it's breaking the fourth wall, but it's not because they don't address the audience, but they address like the show in a way.
So both those instances, like the negative of Friends and the positive of The Office, kind of recognize the format that they're dealing with. Like Friends is like shot in a studio, 3 cameras, da-da-da. And then The Office has that multi-camera documentary tone. And I think you got me thinking about the Friends thing that do you think beyond the limits of television that it is a Gen X thing? Like that Gen X never really took itself super seriously about serious issues that they were dealing with on the show. And as a result, that's how the writers treated it. Like they treat everything as a laugh. Like I know people like I have uncles and cousins and stuff, people with like serious problems, and you see those serious problems with them, and they're just kind of like laugh it off, like and
don't really acknowledge it.
They don't acknowledge it and don't deal with it. So I think Friends is like, I guess, a good approximation of that limit. Like it is limited in that sense, but I think some of it might have to do with people's like expectations of like, if you watch it, like, what did you watch first, Office or The Friends? Because if you watch The Office first, and The Office like builds on the sitcom, so does Friends, but it came like after Friends. Yeah, that I can see why you would find Friends severely lacking in the way, because Friends does not ever go into those corners. You're absolutely right.
I don't think that's entirely fair, because it's like, oh,
what do you mean fair?
Like you could say like
fair to who?
Fair, I guess, to my argument or like the audience, just because like it's just like, because I don't want to give it a pass in the sense to not say that it's not good. Like there are good episodes and like all these good things, but I don't think it's fair to say like, well, it wasn't as good because of the time. Like it was done in the 90s. They did the best they could. Like they worked with what was normal at the time. And it's just like, okay, that might be fair, but you can't take a newer show like The Office. Like you can take a newer show for The Office and say like, oh, because it's a little bit more open to talk about it, or like because we've learned from the mistakes of Friends, that we can like Friends walked so The Office could run. It's like, okay, maybe, but at the same time, like that doesn't take away from the fact that like they didn't go there.
But here's
Friends
the thing,
didn't go to those dark corners. So like I just don't think it's fair just because it's a generational thing.
So I think that like every episode of Friends is 22 minutes. With 3 act commercial breaks in between. The Office also aired on the same network several years later.
They did the same thing except for season 3 or 4.
The Office has hour-long episodes though sometimes.
For just one season they did 45-minute episodes. That's it. Everything else is
45-minute episodes.
To 22 minutes or whatever.
But
it was only one season they did that.
So you don't think it's like the comedy demands being different? Because like Arrested Development never, that was kind of the first mockumentary style sitcom, and they never once like went that deep. Like Seinfeld never went that deep.
No, but in Friends, like, and you could say like, you know, you're locked into 22 minutes. You know, can only get to see so much. That's fair. However, is Friends. They started going there. They had the intimate moment with Ross and Rachel with the candles and like all that stuff. And they started and copped out. Other shows like Seinfeld, they never attempted it.
Oh yeah, so it took its foot off the gas.
Yes, they started going to the dark corner and they backed off. Like if there was a moment like, oh, Jerry, Seinfeld and you know, Elaine, they kind of had like this moment and then like backed off with a laugh. It's like, oh, Seinfeld tried it, but they copped out. It's like, no. Friends tried it and they backed off. The Office tried it and they went all the way. That's what I'm saying is Friends got their feet wet but didn't dive in, which it's like, no, if you're going in for it, go for it. Do it, right? Don't cop out. Don't go half in and then back off with a laugh. It's like, oh yeah, they did it. They had intimate moments. They didn't. They started it.
So those moments where they started it but didn't finish, that wasn't enough for what you were looking for.
That's right. And if they never attempted those intimate moments, then I would say, okay, well then that's just not the show. Right? Because Seinfeld, it's like, well, Seinfeld didn't have intimate moments. They never tried it. That's just not the show. But Friends tried it and copped out.
Yeah.
Office tried it and they went all the way. That's what I'm saying.
So my counter argument,
no half in, no half out. Go for it or don't go for it.
I'll give you that point, that there's more emotional depth to The Office. And I would say even
my other one was Jim when he was you can tempt it or not.
This was going to be my
argument. The storyline when he could cheat. And like, I know we know now that John Krasinski, the writers wanted him to cheat. And John Krasinski was like, no, I'm not going to do that, which I think was the best move. Yeah. Because there was
Did you want more chips, by the way?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Because there was... because later on in the series, after Michael had left, when Jim was trying to start his athlete agency program or whatever, and then like Pam, I think in like season 8 or not, I think it was season 8, Pam, she's talking about how Jim is going to Philadelphia and like, it's putting on some stress or whatever. And it's kind of like, oh, like Pam, like, how are you dealing with that? Right. And she's like, oh, it's not so bad and blah, blah, blah. And then she breaks down and she's like, I'm having a really hard time. It's making it really difficult. And like, they're like, oh, like, what do you mean? And she's just kind of like, she just admits, she's just kind of like, I don't want to tell Jim because then I know he'll take his foot off the gas for his dream. And I don't want to be the reason why he doesn't follow his dream. And like, that's a real dichotomy. That's a real like hard thing I can imagine as a husband and a wife, right? Like you don't want to be the reason why your husband or your spouse gives up, right? So then like the cameraman puts the camera down and like the cameraman breaks the fourth wall and has this moment with Pam where it's like, hey, like it's going to be okay. And you're like, what the hell is this? Right? It breaks the fourth wall of this mockumentary. But I liked it because it was like, here we are 8 seasons later and Jim and Pam never really had a stressor on their relationship.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just like, oh, realistic, unrealistic, whatever. But you get to this point where it's just like, oh, here we go. Here's a real stressor, right? Because like, again, Pam he's following his dream, but Pam doesn't want to be the reason, right? Like, what do you do? I think it was season 8. It was near the end because it was after Michael left. It was after Michael left, certainly. But the one for him cheating, Jim was like, she wanted to cheat. Jim never wanted to cheat. And it was just her constantly trying to like break down his defenses and he never, whatever. So you could like argue that was like a moment where he could have, but like at no point was he like, this is about to happen if I want it to or not. I'm choosing not to. He was like, no, this isn't happening. It's never going to happen. So like it was just her trying to beat down a wall that was never coming down. So it's arguable, but like, no, he never faltered. But the fact that he was trying to do this athlete agent thing and follow his dream and Pam was having a hard time and didn't want to be the reason why he stopped. I was like, okay, here is a real problem. Like, how do they deal with it? Right. So like it's like, here's a real problem. What do? They didn't take their foot off the gas. And it's like, oh, it looks like Jim was able to figure out this thing that it worked out for everybody. It's like, no, like, what do you do? Yeah. Right? So that's where The Office tried it and they went for it. They didn't take their foot off the gas and Friends did. So that's why I don't like Friends as much.
The reason why I don't like The Office as much is that...
so The Office as much as Friends? You like Friends more?
Yeah, I think Friends is one of the best TV shows ever made.
I think you're wrong.
Well...
Tell me why.
Glad you asked. So my thing with The Office is that I think, there's a saying, dying is easy, comedy is hard. I find
dying is easy, comedy is hard.
Yeah, it's just a saying that somebody says. It's hard to make somebody,
illuminate that phrase.
Okay. It is hard to make somebody laugh. It is easy to make somebody sad.
Okay.
Yeah. And I find that like doing the emotional stuff actually like cheap. Of like, we could make them laugh, but let's grab them emotionally. And I find with like our generation, I guess I do a lot of our generation blaming, but like so many comedy shows like reach for that pathos and like basically trade laughs for pathos. And I just find like anybody can like make you like fall in love with the characters and make you sad and emotionally grounded because you can just throw bad things at people. But it's like, it's really hard to consistently be funny. And so I find what you're saying about them copping out with a laugh is the exact opposite argument I have about The Office, where it's like they're copping out by being serious. And I find that because
it's the easier thing to do.
Yeah. It's the latter half of The Office, because it's more emotionally charged and is dealing with people deeper in their relationships, is like significantly less funny than the first half of it. And that's just like a decision that they made for the growth of the characters and stuff. I find that The Office in its later seasons is significantly less funny, particularly after Michael leaves, just because...
I disagree. People say that it gets significantly less funny. I don't think it gets significantly less funny. I just think it pivots. The show changes.
Yeah.
That's all.
I don't like the change. The same as you don't like them being serious. My favorite example.
I think it's bad. It's just like oh, it's less funny. Why? Because Michael's not there. Like it's just a different show now. Yeah. Right. Like it's not a fair comparison.
So my argument against The Office has to do with the writing, and it's how they basically wrote Andy's character off. They had to write it off because he was doing the Hangover movies. But the writer...
Yeah, remember, explain that to me. That's why they like kind of like nerfed his character.
Yeah, they basically harbored a grudge against him because he went, and it's like, you're messing up our character to go do your movies and have a Hollywood
Ed Helms, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they made Andy's character kind of like irredeemable. He doesn't end up with Aaron, and he has that, goes wistful...
The America's Got Talent thing or whatever, right?
Yeah, and he goes on a fishing trip as well, and then like when he comes back, he's not the same, and he has that like wistful line of like, I really wish you could find out the good old days before you were while you were in them. Yeah.
Do you think that was like a callback to like Ed Helms actually realizing like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done what I did?
No, I think it's just the character, the writers realizing that they went too far with that character, and they're like, we gotta have Andy realize in a way that he's been a jerk, and it's like, it's too late to fix it because we've already set up columns A and B, but we have to have that closure of realization. It's the same realization at the end of like Shutter Island when Leonardo DiCaprio is like, is it better to like die as a monster or like live as a good man or something like that? And it's like, you realize that like, oh, he can't live with the terrible things that he has done. That's just kind of, we're giving him that realization for the character, even though the character has to like be broken down and tossed in the trash because they're like bad. So that's my thinking is just like, that's an acknowledgement from the writers that they
that's a fond memory. Like people say that, like people have referenced that where it's like, man, when like, Andy says, oh, I wish you realized the good times. So you're saying like, behind the curtains of that was the writer saying like, okay, maybe we took it too far. Yeah. Because like Ed Helms like screwed us. We
damaged the show long term. Like, I think that the show could have, like, too many times it starts Jim on the path of being like Mr. Manager and then pulls the plug on it.
Yeah.
At least 2 or 3 times. He
shares it at one point.
Yeah. It does day to day, one does overall. Right. And that's actually like a thing that businesses do. Like Paramount now is trying to rule with 3 CEOs, where one rules the movie studios and Nickelodeon, one rules CBS and all of their television shows, and then one rules their specialty networks like Showtime and MTV and stuff like that.
So how's that working for them?
Well, they only started it like a month ago, and they're all seasoned executives, so if they can make it work, anyone can, but if they can't, nobody can. And like 3 co-CEOs is like basically never worked in the history of like capitalism that I can think of.
Co-leadership never works.
Yeah, and there are like 3 people involved, and then on top of that, they have the Sherry Redstone, who's like the owner of the company, and it's like just basically a very complicated rights and shares situation. But right now, they're basically set up where it's either like we can run the company like the Michael Scott Paper Company until we find a buyer. So we just basically have to run out the clock on this for like 18 months. And that'll
find
work.
A buyer for what?
Well, Paramount is worth about like $30 billion. They have accumulated a lot of debt, and interest rates are rising, so they need to pay off that debt at some point.
But like, what's the payout? Somebody's gonna buy Paramount?
Yes, it was explored that maybe Sony would for one.
So it'd be like Sony Paramount Pictures.
Yes.
Holy crap! Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So but like that, I believe that deal is like off the table now, essentially, or it hasn't really been spoken about a lot. And Sony
like floated out there, but that's it.
Yeah, and Sony just bought. They were going to buy it for like $30 billion because they had a lot of money. They were going to make a television deal in India where they were going to buy a television manufacturer in India.
Television manufacturer, like actually
that makes TVs or a TV
actually
channel.
Makes TVs.
Yeah. And either that or they TV channels as well, as Sony does both. But they were like their main competitor in India. And basically that deal fell apart. So they had all this money lying around for a deal that didn't happen. Okay. And so the idea was that they would maybe buy Paramount. But the issue with buying Paramount is that Paramount owns CBS. CBS is a broadcast television studio in America. Okay. Sony is a Japanese company. There are laws against a foreign-owned company buying an American broadcast station because a foreign company cannot own a major broadcast network because then they could broadcast propaganda or who knows.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So that's why that's
why you're kind of then that's where you're getting into the weeds of it. It's like, they can buy this much, but not that much.
Yeah, but then they'd have to sell it, and then this is that. Okay, and they have like a huge amount of land. Like they're like 100. Want me to refill this?
Sure, yeah.
They have They're a 100-year-old studio, or a bit over 100 years. They have the only movie studio left in the Los Angeles County district. Everyone else has moved out of like LA or Hollywood. But basically they're
cheaper areas.
Yeah. Like Universal City or whatever, like Disney is in Anaheim, like further north and stuff like that. But it's a prime piece of real estate in the middle of LA that by its own is worth like $30 million. Like it's a major,
big money.
Yeah. So the idea is like, well, whoever buys it is just going to tear up the company. They're going to sell the land, and the legacy that like this family, the Redstones, have been building their whole lives is like gone.
For generations.
Yeah, is gone.
Right.
And like they inherited it like or bought it in like the 80s or something. I think Sumner Redstone did, but like it's been a part of the legacy of that family or whatever.
Right.
So they've been trying to look for a buyer and have unsuccessfully because they're so expensive. But at the same time, they have a lot of debt. So the question is, like, can they afford to keep going when you have, like, supersized, like, mega merger companies, like Disney buying Fox, Warner Brothers.
Disney buying Lucasfilms.
Yeah. Warner Brothers and Discovery, like, mashed together, but they have a lot of debt themselves, so maybe they might be bought by somebody. Universal Pictures is owned by Comcast, which is like a major cable provider, so they always have like a lot of money.
So a question for you, for Paramount, it's just like, oh, we're waiting for a buyer, like, because you understand it better than me, like, why? So what's an alternative to them getting rid of their debt? Like, making hit movies?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like, can they?
It's like don't wait for a buyout. Buy yourself out of your debt. Like, make good movies that make good money.
That's the question. It's like, can they do that? I mean, they can. Like, the thing is that they don't need to. But it's just basically the landscape with like Disney buying a giant company and then Sony buying other giant companies and stuff. It's like eat or get eaten. And then the major ridiculous thing is that people are saying now that like, well, we have to see who wins the presidency, because if Joe Biden wins another 4 years, then the person who's in charge of the FCC will like break up any big company that tries to happen. So that will go one way. But if Trump does it, he'll do nothing, and they'll successfully be able to buy up whoever they want because like, yeah. So it's like they're wondering that. I personally think that's just like a ridiculous way of thinking about it. But like my whole point to try and like circle back to like the friends in office of it all, and I don't even remember how we got on this, but it was just basically about the writer's response to like their own product becoming so big, is that like BJ Novak and who's the Indian girl? Why can't I remember her name?
Kelly
Kapoor, played by Mindy Kaling. And they basically like wrote their own relationship, and they've like written the most amount of stuff. And they talk about like, oh, we have this complicated relationship with our co-stars and stuff. So it's just basically like anything goes on long enough, you basically write yourself into the text if you run out of things to say. And they have like other
to mix things up.
Yeah,
it's almost inevitable. Like,
well, it's just like inevitable. Anything that goes on long enough. Friends, I find, because their decision, which was made in like contracts and economics, to have 6 leads of the show, they allowed themselves to give the breathing room that lasted 10 seasons. Whereas The Office, in my opinion, failed to build itself up for the long term with characters that it sort of had, but basically once Michael leaves, there's a bit of a vacuum on the show, and it never quite feels the same way.
And that's where I think that this show changes.
Yeah.
Because I think it's wrong to say like, oh, it's not as good because Michael's not there.
Yeah.
It's just like, no, like this character isn't there anymore. It's a different show. It's one thing to say like, oh, it's not as good even as a different show. Because I mean, like I remember watching Community when like Chevy Chase got like booted off, and then like,
and I actually stopped watching not like at that point, like sometime before. But it's funny how I like. It's you stop watching for different reasons. Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean Chevy Chase left, and then Donald Glover left. Like it was definitely like very like rocky waters or whatever during that time. And people's like, did it get worse? And it's like, arguably worse. I can kind of like get with that, but like they acknowledged the change in like how things were going, that it was just kind of like, yeah, like this is what it is now. And like they kind of stayed true to the show. So like, I don't want to say it was like worse, but like, it was almost this acknowledgement that you couldn't ignore that like Chevy Chase wasn't there, Donald Glover wasn't there, right? Like the show is like so different that it's like they're not going to build a new show, right? Like they've made this foundation. Yeah.
Perhaps it's not a difference of quality then, it's just a difference of opinion on like what you sign up for, because like you're fine with The Office like changing into a different show. To me, that's like not what I watched The Office for. And then Friends refuses to do that, and because of its refusal to change, it like doesn't score as many points.
Here's one. Did you ever watch Suits?
Yes.
Okay. When what's the guy's name? Meghan Markle and what's his name? They leave the show.
Ross.
Is it
Mike Ross?
Mike Ross, yeah.
Oh, the actor?
Or whatever, Mike Ross, yeah. So the character
Patrick
Mike
J. Adams is
yeah. So when him and Meghan Markle, when they leave, it's like season 7, and they continue the show for season 8 and 9.
Yeah.
So by
as is usually the case with The Office, also ran 9 seasons, I think.
Yeah, that's right. So my argument, I would say like, okay, well, it's a different show, right?
But in my opinion, also worse once.
Hold on. So it would be a different show because these two major characters have now left the show, and it's like, oh, it got worse. It's like, well, hold on. These characters aren't there anymore. They have an opportunity to like change the show. To bring
Cheers
in the show,
did it a bunch of times.
Or whatever, right? So it's just kind of like, here's a different opportunity. Oh, it's not worse. It's just different. So by my argument, I would say Suits got worse. And it's not just because Mike and Meghan Markle left. I would say it got worse because, sure, they left. They started introducing different characters. That's fine. However, Harvey. Sure, one more. So Harvey, his character, he'd find different angles. There'd be a new case, and it's just like, oh, we got to like research this thing, and oh, we got to like work the man, not the case. And it was just like all these different angles of like winning, right? And like ultimately, like obviously, Michael and Harvey Specter, like they won because of their cunning, and they were able to like see things that the other guy couldn't see, and blah blah blah. Like they earned the win. Okay, so when Mike Ross leaves, Harvey Specter, his character just kind of becomes a caricature of himself because like the show kind of continues on the same. It's just like, oh, Mike's not here. Like we can still do this without Mike. And it's like, all right, fine. Let's see what they do with it. And then how does Harvey Specter start winning? Is he wins because like the cases are brought to him and it's like, oh, here's this environmental case and blah, blah, blah. And instead of just being like, oh, you got to work the man and you got to do this and blah, 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 money, money, money. And we're going to figure this out. And instead of him figuring this out, he's just more so like, well, I'm Harvey Specter. I'm the best in New York. So I'm just going to win, right? And they're like, well, I guess so. He is Harvey Specter. He is the best in town. So I guess we might just lose. And then Harvey just like figures something out that is just like, hey, here's something you didn't think about. More? No. And it's just like, here's this thing that you didn't think about. And it's just like, darn it. Harvey wins again.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, like you didn't earn that. Yeah, so like, that's where it gets worse is that like, the show has an opportunity to pivot, like when Michael leaves, it pivots and it brings in Robert California, and it just changes, right? But Suits was like, okay, Michael leaves, Meghan Markle leaves, here's an opportunity to pivot, and it's just kind of like they just kind of like dialed up what they already had working for them up to 11, which just didn't work. And it's just like, oh, I'm just gonna win because I'm the best, and it's like, well, I guess you're right, he is the best, I guess he wins, and it's like that's what we're doing.
The downward pressure in the inner workings of like, we have to find this out before we find Mike out makes like the whole show work essentially because the whole
which can only last so long. But I mean, like it's like they couldn't have thought of something to like make that kind of go away, or like it's like, oh well, maybe it's time to wrap it up if we can't think of any more reasons to give them excuses.
I'll say that like
I'm not getting caught.
I kind of left. This is a shocking admission, but like I left both The Office and Suits like at a certain time. I still to this day haven't finished them. I've seen the finale of The Office.
I didn't finish Suits. I got like through season 8 and then like a few episodes of season 9. I was like, this is ridiculous.
One of the things people never discuss on like their favorite TV shows is when to get off, like the off train of like, I stopped watching The Office. I think it was even, I was watching it religiously, and then I watched it up until the Robert California season, which I think is just like first season.
I think they do 7, 8, and 9 is Robert. There's 3 seasons without Michael.
Yeah, but doesn't Robert California leave after like a season, and they like
no.
or he moves into the background, right?
I think so. Michael leaves at the end of season 6, and they kind of spend almost all of season 7 finding the new manager.
Yeah.
And then Robert California comes in, I don't know, halfway or whatever
Yeah.
through season 7, but then he's fully there 8 and 9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine if they got James Gandolfini.
Oh god! During that timing, that would have been bad.
Well, that's I told you this, didn't I? About
Was that a thing?
he was offered, and there's questions of is he actually going to do it, or did he just have hell of an agent? But he was going to be offered $5 million to I guess shot near or in the same city and he was going to come in and basically be the replacement for Michael Scott.
So what? He was going to be Tony Soprano in The Office?
He was going to be. Well, that's the thing is that he was going to be Robert California, and they hadn't formed it yet. But HBO, their parent company, Warner Brothers, too. HBO probably paid it on its own because it used to be a $3 billion a year industry. Now it's a bit less because they streaming and stuff. But they paid James Gandolfini $4 million not to do it because they said he is our Tony Soprano. He is a gangster, tough as nails dude. We
all know Tony Soprano.
Yeah, we need people.
Which would have ended in 2007. What Office started in 08?
Something like that.
So we're not far off from that.
But it's still which is why it's so funny because it's there's no conflict of show.
Right.
HBO sees that's fine. It's a hardwood table. For our audience, somebody just made a spill, but
spill the chip.
Yeah. You double dip the chip.
It's putting a whole mouth in the chip.
Yeah. I'm trying to watch Seinfeld, by the way. Now I'm on season 2. It's rough. That. I've seen all the best episodes already.
Season 1's a little bit rough, but it gets better.
I'll make my way through.
Yeah, 4 to 6.
I can't binge it. It's not a bingeable show.
What? I totally disagree.
I watch 1 or 2. I'm good.
When you're into season 3 to 6, 7, that's core Seinfeld. They're into their stride. That's the show. Yeah.
8 and 9 are brutal though because
Larry and David left. I don't think it's as bad. I didn't know that until after I watched the show, and it was years later. Someone was yeah, did you know this happened? I was oh, I didn't even notice.
I watched this and it's in the penultimate episode where they're just looking at a guy and making fun of him because he's fat and he's being robbed.
Yeah, that's the end of the show.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of that's that's a weird. That's just kind of weird thing for they.
I think that was kind of the point is that or at least the way I interpret it is that they were kind of running out of ideas.
Yeah.
It's just kind of oh, you say the penultimate because it's kind of they're doing the thing in a really simplistic, crude way of what they've always done the whole show. Right. So it's just this guy's getting robbed, which is John Panette, who's died now. Yeah. But he's getting robbed and they're help. He's help me. And it was oh, look at this loser or whatever. And it's just that's kind of what they did. The whole show.
Right? It's just more expressed. I hate how people on TikTok, of course, are just kind of Larry David was the whole show and Jerry Seinfeld didn't have anything to do it. And it's they were partners. That was a marriage. They had Jerry knows how lucky he was. And he said before that he couldn't do it again. But for people to just toss it off because they don't like Jerry Seinfeld.
Why?
They don't like Jerry Seinfeld because he's Jewish and he therefore support and he's a big but he's a big supporter of Israel but
let's roll back the clock a year ago.
But people don't roll back the clock anymore. It's
I went and saw Jerry Seinfeld when he came to K-Rock in 2010.
Yeah. But if we're going back by now, he's had when his Unfrosted movie came out. Have you seen Unfrosted?
No.
It's terrible. It is terrible. And I'm
are you just saying that or is it actually terrible?
It is actually terrible. I like B-Movie. And I believe that Jerry Seinfeld is talented. If you watch his most recent stand-up for Netflix, I think that he did.
Yeah.
That is to me a legitimately funny thing. And the problem with the Unfrosted is just that he's the writer, the director, and the star. And he's not a good director. He could have co-written it and starred in it and gotten the guy who directed almost Tom Sharon or Andy Ackerman or somebody who had directed the majority of the Seinfeld. They were available. They co-wrote the movie with him. Yeah. But he insisted at 70 years old, he's I'm going to direct this movie. And his direction in Unfrosted is just terrible. So many things of Bill Burr as John F. Kennedy, super funny. but not very funny under Seinfeld's direction. It's just kind of like, it's flat. It's a totally flat movie. It's just the jokes don't
land.
Yeah, they don't land. And so it's like, maybe if he directed and didn't star in it, or if he wrote and starred but didn't direct.
Took away one of those three things.
Yeah, and produce, it would have been fine. But yeah, it's like him kind of coasting, and it's like, people will watch this, and then you find
I'm Jerry Seinfeld,
and it's like the whole breakfast cereal has the right stuff kind of thing, like that gives a structure to it. Melissa McCarthy like does try in the movie, but it's just kind of like afterwards he doesn't seem to like care or even like about his own premise, so he doesn't like invest in his own premise, and because of that it doesn't work. So it's just kind of like it's stupid but also not funny. You can kind of watch it because there's a conveyor belt of whoa, look who they got to be in this scene. You know, Peter Dinklage, Christian Slater, you know. But it's like, it's unwatchable. Like, my dad got up and left. And my dad's like a bigger Jerry Seinfeld fan than me, although he doesn't appreciate B-Movie the same. But but yeah,
with sexual tension between the main characters,
which he apologized for.
I saw that,
which was just kind of like, I got to apologize for something. Let me apologize for this, even though B-Movie is what that generation who's going after him now likes the most about him. Is this middle of the road DreamWorks movie? I've seen the edits of like B-movie without the B's, B-movie, but every time they say B, it goes 2 times faster.
Yeah. Hey, you like jazz?
Yeah.
like revved up to like 1 million times.
Man, it's so funny.
Hey, you like jazz? Times 2, times 4, times 8, 16.
Yeah. You like jazz?
And it just like your speakers is just like overflowing. Like
feedback into feedback into feedback.
It's like, who does this?
Yeah. I always wonder how those get. But it's like, as every sitcom has its like kind of cultural relevance. And I would say that Friends having those 6 people as the leads, which still kind of hasn't been done, is what gave it that length that it could go that long without changing.
However, in the last like 2 seasons, I think you have to agree that Joey and Phoebe, they just kind of were just like satellite orbiting.
I would agree.
4.
I wouldn't say orbiting.
Because you remember season 1 that Joey, he was kind of like this. I was like, kind of like grew up rough and tumble, you know, poor.
Yeah, they sanded it down.
He fixed the radiator, right? Yeah. And like by like halfway through season 2, he just like gets sanded down.
Yeah,
he just gets really polished, and it's just like, oh man, that could have been this like opportunity of like street smarts, you know what I mean? And like it's like, hey, this is how it really works, you know? And they didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, so what I would say though, because people bring up like the fake out with like Joey and Joey and Rachel being together.
Yeah. And that could have been something.
Yeah, but it was just, I mean, they would have kept it longer, but Jennifer Aniston wanted to have a film career, so they had to cut it down. Basically, that's why the last season is only 17 episodes. Yeah, they could have kept it going, but I find
how is that able to determine? Like, if Jennifer Aniston is like, I want to have a film career, what's stopping the producers to be like, well, no, like you signed a contract for 22 episodes.
No, because you can't. There are negotiations. They were up to like $1 million an episode.
Yeah, that's like the big thing that they all stuck together.
They were the first, and because they had collective bargaining power, they were all like, we've done this for 10 years. Like 10 years is the perfect amount of time, is like the perfect run for a show. If a show can like have its lungs to be like Bones, I know runs longer than that. Grey's Anatomy has now gone twice as long as that. Everybody I know, a lot of women who watch Grey's Anatomy, they watch like maybe the first 12 seasons and ditch the rest, but it's still going to this day.
You can just ask Rachel about that because like she feels somewhat strongly about Grey's, how it's just like, why does the show keep doing this thing?
Yeah, my mom said put an end to it.
Yeah, end it.
Yeah, but I would say with Suits is like, I got off when Jessica Pearson left. And she had a spin-off show that I never watched. But there's like a thing where she makes like an ethical mistake is made, and it was something like that Mike did or something like that.
Right.
And they fix it and it's fine. But she says like, I did something today that I promised myself in law school that I would never do.
Yeah.
And I've crossed that line. It's time for me to go now. And
Right.
I was just kind of like, okay, it's good. Because the other thing that irritates me...
I vaguely remember that, yeah.
And that's like at season 7, I think right before, like the season before Mike leaves. Because I didn't even watch Mike being in prison, which is kind of a rewarding storyline. I've seen bits and pieces of it.
Yeah.
But
It's been a while since I've seen it.
because he's there with Eric Roberts, whose character I forget.
yeah.
Yeah, but they're wearing those cool, stylish jean jackets as prison uniforms. What a good, what a good like costume design move. I always love when they in movies or TV shows when somebody is like, oh, this is what the prison uniform looks like, and it's like kind of stylish, but you believe it as a prison uniform.
Right?
It's like good costume design there.
Sure.
But like with Friends, the thing that I like most about Friends is that I actually think it bucks a lot of trends, but it does it so well that you don't notice. In the classic, and I'm sure Three's Company, of course, must have this kind of, the show you're watching now, is like the two places at once, cliche of like the one with two parties is the episode of Friends to which I'm referring. I've seen this on, That's So Raven, a lot of Even Stevens, a lot of...
like the misunderstanding, like two characters think that there's...
Mrs. Doubtfire is the example of this, where he has the business meeting and the dinner with his kids at the same time. And it's like, well, you can't be in two places at once at this restaurant. You can't go to the restaurant for your business meeting and be with your kids as Mrs. Doubtfire. And basically what happens is he's drinking with his boss and gets drunk and like messes it up. And that's where he's like found out. And like Disney Channel shows, they've done it endlessly. And at the end of every single plot line is always they get caught because you can't be in two places at once.
Right.
And you can't be a person living two lives. You're living a lie.
Right.
It doesn't work. You need to come clean.
Right.
Friends kind of, and this is made up by, I'm not sure if you've ever seen It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but
not really.
they're like,
Clips.
but they're terrible people. And the show never like lets
I got
off.
that vibe from the clips.
The show never lets off that they're terrible people.
Like it never lets them off the hook.
Yeah, like it reminds you that it's like these sitcom characters are kind of like toxic people. They ruin any other relationship that they're in because they're like married to their friends because the story dictates that they have to be married to their friends.
Okay.
But there's an episode of The One with Two Parties early on where Rachel's mother and father each go to like a party one is in Joey and Chandler's apartment. It's before it's Joey and Chandler's apartment. I forget who.
There's the boys' apartment.
In the girls' apartment. Yeah. Anyway, and it's like the dad goes to the one, Rachel's dad goes to the one, Rachel's mom goes to the other, and they can't be in the same one, and it's for Rachel's birthday or something like that.
Because the parents are like, they don't like each other anymore or something.
Yeah, and there'd be like a big fight and that kind of thing.
Right.
And
so they have to separate them.
Yeah, and it's funny that I didn't notice this until watching it on Netflix, but like I'd seen that trope a bunch, and I'm like, okay, here we go. They're gonna find out at the end of the
We're there all along
because of course what happens is like, oh, I have to go get my jacket, and it's like in Monica's
apartment. I gotta
apartment.
get my wallet.
And it's like
whatever. Yeah.
And you're just like, well, there's no way that they can like that he can be in the same room and like not recognize that it is. And they do this such like ridiculous thing where because there's like 6 of them, the guys like create a wall for the dad and he's like, let me get your jacket. Yeah. And then they're like, where he's walking and the wife, his ex-wife is like right behind in the kitchen. So if he just like turns his head or looks over them, he'll see that the mom is there. So he's like, let me get your jacket. And then they're like, boing, boing, boing.
Blocking the mom.
And they like just wife. In such like an absurd, ridiculous way that it's like, the episode ends and they don't find out. The friends like succeed at lying and they like...
So this trope that's always blown up in their face.
Yeah, it's in Mrs. Doubtfire. It's like you can't live 2 lives. And like it's been done in like 10 other movies that somebody has an important business meeting and they also... So they
have their kid's birthday at the same time.
Their professional and romantic emotional lives are entangled. And this is the one example I can think of where they succeed by like sticking together. It's like this impossible thing we got through because we're friends, and it doesn't like hit you over the head with that. But I remember watching it on Netflix and being like, they're totally gonna like flop and that's where this is going. But it's like, no, they like succeed in lying to their parents.
Okay. So what's your point?
Because they stick together. And my point is like, it's an example of the show just like going with its characters and like bucking the trends that like bucking the story trends that
the trope of getting caught.
Yeah, and I just find that the show like so many times like we'll do this fine. Like the reason the whole transponster thing during like the trivia and they get the apartment thing. I like watching it. I'm like, well, of course, there's no way that they're going to get the apartment because it's a sitcom. On a sitcom, things stay the same,
right?
And then like the Monica's horror of like he's a transponster, and then the timer goes up, and her being like, no,
what the hell is a transponster?
Yeah. That's not even a word.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the guy's going like,
we won by a point or whatever. Yeah,
and it's just like that emotional high. I was like with them, and of course they end up like changing apartments, and they like stick like they stick
it out for a few episodes.
Yeah, like a season. And
because the girl's apartment is arguably better.
Yeah, it's the better one.
Yeah.
So I just kind of find that impressive that the show finds its way back around naturally to the equilibrium, but it's not afraid to make a big splash.
Okay, and I think those are valid, which I do think that's why the show is able to hold up.
And like, keep the comedy going.
Yeah,
too.
and keep it going. But my point is that like it just really upset me that they tried going serious or tried going a different
and underpinned it,
and then underpinned it because but like but by the same almost like I don't know dichotomy or the same balance, you're saying, well, they put their foot on the gas for this trope that should end this way, but they put their foot on the gas and put their rolled the dice on their friendship and won. And it's just like, okay, that's good. Like they're allowed to do that. Yeah. They're allowed to do that. But I'm saying like for these reasons of why they tried to go serious and pulled the plug halfway through is my personal reason why I can't
get behind it.
I can't get behind it. I can't get behind it. I'm not going to be wearing a Friends t-shirt.
Yeah.
I'm not. That's it.
So let me ask you this one thing to kind of close it off is like, do you think that there will be like another Friends office, or it's like because those exist, people like still continue, like they're arguably weirdly more
3-camera sitcom.
Like they're, I mean, I don't want to get into that because it's like we haven't had that in a while. But do you think like there will be another?
You'd almost say the last 3-camera sitcom was like The Big Bang Theory.
Yes,
the last big one.
Yeah. Even Young Sheldon was like a multi-camera sitcom where it's like they follow them around documentary style, and there's like not a set.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, it's just like there's one studio, left camera, right camera, center camera, or a camera that like follows the actors. That was originally created for Robin Williams because on Mork and Mindy, they never knew what he was going to do. And they never knew where to follow him. He would like go off screen, go up the stairs or whatever. So they
just had to have constantly.
Yeah. So the guy, he directed Princess Diaries, Gary Marshall, was a TV producer, and he created the third camera to follow Robin Williams because he was so creative.
Like there was one camera exclusively
They used to have two cameras on, and if you watch shows from like the 50s and stuff, they'll have like left and right.
That's it.
Yeah. But now it's like left, right, center and stuff. And that was created because they had to follow Robin Williams around.
And his energy and stuff.
Yeah, and the third camera exists to this day because of Robin Williams.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So my thing is like, I had this thought a few months ago that like, oh, do movies suck now because of like streaming services? Not because streaming movies suck, but because there's such a catalog of older movies that we can watch instead of going out to see new movies, that it's like, oh, I can like, I've been meaning to watch it, but Cocoon, like I'd watch Cocoon. That's an old movie from the 80s rather than, go see Inside Out 2 in theaters. And like, my thing is like, if there's a catalog of like all these new movies that like you haven't seen, they're like from the 80s that are scanned to be high definition and stuff.
Right. Remastered.
And they're remastered. They're still written pretty well. They have, the special effects in the action movies aren't as good, but they did do practical stuff. But like the Steadicam, which allowed cameras to like move about and stuff like that's where people can carry the cameras on their waist. That was invented around Rocky in 1975. So it's like from 1975 to like 2015, you have like a pretty decent collection of like maybe 250, I'll say like 50 good movies for each year or whatever.
Okay.
Is that like enough? And that's the reason why there doesn't seem like there's as many good movies made today. So my question is like, do you think that there's like less of a desire or there won't be another like mega sitcom like Friends or The Office because of the streaming culture.
I do think that if you're thinking about the 3-camera sitcom or the sitcoms as we think about them now,
those are dead.
I want to say that they're dead because you can't ignore the fact of media now in the sense that, like, you know, when it was cable and cable dominated for decades, that it was just kind of like, you know, like you're going to watch Friends. It's Thursday night, 8 o'clock. You got to be there to watch it. And that's it. Now you can stream a whole season in a weekend.
But now,
like, it's just not consumed that way.
Like The Last of Us, granted, that's like a cable show, but that's like week to week.
Last of Us?
Yeah.
How would you say that's a cable show?
Oh, because it's on HBO.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess so. Okay.
But it's like they're starting to go back, like Presumed Innocent with Jake Gyllenhaal is an Apple TV show that just came out. And that's doing like, it starts with 2 episodes and then it's week to week. Shogun, like week to week. Shogun was a show on cable.
Yeah, they're kind of like referring to cable now, and also introducing ads, even though you pay for it.
Yeah, that's like so annoying.
Frustrating.
Yeah, so it's like,
just give it to me for free.
Yeah, so it's like somebody, was the most, they didn't mention Netflix, so I don't know if it includes Netflix, but Tubi was the most watched streaming service last month.
Really?
More than Disney Plus, more than Paramount Plus, of course, more than Amazon Prime Video.
Tubi, because it's free.
Yeah.
But they have like
ads.
B movies at best.
No. They have they have a bunch of movies from like the 80s. I've seen a few. They are like filled with schlocky horror movies, but they actually have like a ton of movies. They're owned by Fox, the Fox that wasn't sold to Disney, actual Fox proper or whatever.
Right.
And they now they have like a bunch of movies. You kind of have to look for them, but they do have like a lot of movies. It's mainly
checking out.
Yeah, it's mainly populated by like schlocky horror movies, dime store. That they actually have more horror movies by like 10 times the amount than Shudder does, which is kind of funny. Shudder actually doesn't have as many horror movies.
And that's Shudder's like dominantly for horror?
Yeah, that's like its whole thing, but like Tubi crushes it. Because they take one thing that they did that I saw, there was this movie or this TV show back when they tried to recreate Lost in television events. There was this show after Gravity came out that they got Alfonso Cuarón, who has since won 2 Oscars for Best Directing for Roma and Gravity. But after he made Gravity, he made a show produced with J.J. Abrams called Believe. That was like a sci-fi show.
Okay.
But because the landscape was changing and appointment viewing was less and less, it didn't it was incredibly well produced, but it didn't find an audience. So you have all of these amazing event television shows that NBC was trying to make an event out of something and people just weren't there at the time.
Bad timing?
Yeah. It was just basically people were already at that point renting seasons of The OC or Friends or borrowing them from people to just binge watch. Binge watching was already there at that point. It might have been around the time of Gravity was 2013, so House of Cards was already out. So binge watching was already the thing.
Yeah.
And this is where it's still... Anyway,
so Tubi... 13, 14, 20.
Yeah, so you have a show that, the pilot was directed by this 2-time Academy Award winner. It had a sizable budget. They did 1 full season, or, at least 6 episodes. Yeah, and it was, well enough reviewed by television standards, but, nobody watched it, so they, canceled it. But, Tubi is, okay, we'll put it on Tubi then. And a bunch of people watch it, and it's a hit.
Oh, it's amazing, yeah.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, there was this show, Winona Earp, which, people watch and and they found that, people are watching Winona Earp. So they, last year ordered a movie for them to, just make a Winona Earp movie because a lot of people are spending their time on Tubi. Yeah, they were okay, well, we'll just, put some people together to make a movie.
Figure this out.
Yeah, so that's coming this year. So it's just kind of funny how it's people like free. Who knew?
Yeah, and I feel at least that's maybe a trade-off in modern day because it's just why would we give it to you for free? And it's just kind of with how things are going, it's just yeah, give it to me for free, but just put an ad in my face. People are willing for that trade-off, but it's just if I'm going to give you $9.99, I don't want ads.
Yeah, I'm
paying you.
I pay $21.99 for Netflix.
Really?
Yeah, that's what it's up to. And my mom...
Really? If I were to start a new account now, I'd be paying $21?
For HD, yeah. $18.99 plus tax. With tax, it comes to $21.99.
Holy shit!
Yeah, that's
expensive.
Yeah, I
remember when I was getting it for
pay
$7.99.
You can pay $7.99, but there will be ads.
Yeah.
But that's not what. And there are even some things now where they're starting to experiment on, of course, where you can't watch something on the ad tier of it. So it's like, oh, this isn't available to. Yeah.
Because you're like silver membership.
Yeah.
It's only available for like.
My prediction is that like eventually Netflix will fulfill its destiny and become like a TV only service, and all of its movies will be regarded as like television movies. And
so like you pay a subscription for like whatever stuff, and then you pay an additional to access their movies, kind of thing.
Yeah, but it's annoying. Like I mean, going by my last podcast, I don't like theaters, but like the quality of movies on Netflix versus like actual movies that get released in theaters. Theatrical movies are like better movies. Like they were checked by more people before going out the door. And the quality that you listen to them, like somebody complained about Immaculate, the Sydney Sweeney Nun movie.
I saw that, yeah.
And somebody said like, the lighting like sucks on this. Like I can't see what's going on. And the director said, yeah, I know it's a streaming thing. The bit rate compression is like too low. Because like on Netflix, it's like 23 megabits per second. If you watch something from an actual DVD, even if it's standard definition, the information is coming at you at like 40 bits a second. So it's less compressed. Right. And when they compress something, they compress the sound. So like the higher stuff is high, the lower stuff is low, and the dialogue in the middle gets like drowned out. Because it's like it gets flattened and equalized. Right. And that also happens with like the lighting and stuff like that. So it looks good on the surface, but then it's just like this immeasurable quality. You can't tell where it's like, I don't know where this information is going, but like, yeah, the audio
one
quality.
Of those things like, I don't know what it is, but I know something's different and it's not as good.
Yeah. And it's like the audio quality.
You don't notice it, but your brain does, kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's just stuff not getting mixed well. Like there's, like, oh, we have stronger cameras now, so we don't have to like plan and mic everything up. Like that's another part of it of like, oh, we have higher definition cameras. And it's like, yeah, but you still need to light your nighttime scenes, like if you watch Lord of the Rings, the entire Night Helm's Deep sequence is blue because you can like see the light. And one of the actors like asked, it was like during one of the Hobbit scenes where they're being chased by the Nazgul or whatever. Yeah. And they're like, where's the light coming from in this scene? And then Peter Jackson said the same place where the music is coming from.
Which would be the middle?
No, it just means that like it's like movie magic. Like you don't have to think too hard. Like it doesn't. We don't have to have a realistically lit nighttime scene where you can't see shit. It's like let's actually like there are people actually watching this movie, so let's make it like watchable, even though it might come at the expense of like realism.
Okay, I see. I see.
So it's like
they
went
like they went the road of like the audience and like this thing instead of like while sacrificing a little bit of realism, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's like everybody complains about. Did you watch Game of Thrones at all or no?
Oh, like the first season, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean. Season 4 is epic, but like there's a scene I'm sure you heard people complaining about it, and they did it in House of the Dragon too, where like it's dark. The whole thing is dark. Okay. There's not a candle in sight. You can't see shit.
On purpose?
Yes.
Okay.
And like they just went away from like realistically like, and it's like not only do we not want that, we don't want the moonlight to like pick up on these cameras. So
just like
they waited and filmed on a new moon. And didn't light it, and people can't see shit. And then people complained, and then they were just like, oh, well, it's just high definition TVs that have, like, you have a shitty TV. That's why you can't enjoy this thing. And it's like, I watched it on a 4K TV. It still sucked.
By today's standards, it's as best as it could be.
But it's just because the technology is more fluid now that people are basically like, well, we can fix it in post. We can do this. And then it just never gets fixed. And so it's like, with things losing their sense of humor and stuff and people wanting to be like more realistic about stuff, it's like, when is the next like laugh gonna be? Like when's the next like bit? We're due for like Young Sheldon was like the last television show.
And that's
like,
and that's kind of like an epilogue to like
echo
to what it
and they're doing like another spin-off and stuff like that. Like it's
even younger Sheldon. Baby Sheldon.
They're making it about either Sheldon's older brother or his dad or something like that is like the next spin-off, and that'll be fine. But like, and people said that Young Sheldon was quite good.
I did hear that Young Sheldon was good, that it offered stuff about Sheldon that like you kind of took for granted, or it's just kind of like, oh, it was always like this, but then you get to see the other side that Sheldon didn't see.
Yeah.
That it was like, oh, this is way better.
I remember watching the Big Bang Theory finale, which feels like both recent memory and ages ago. But like, it was like not that funny at all by that point. The early seasons of Big Bang, I haven't watched the show.
It is weird when they say like, oh, watch the Big Bang Theory without the laugh track. It's not as funny. And then you watch a few minutes of it and you're like, yeah, this isn't funny.
And first of all, like, fuck that argument.
Why?
Because the laugh track, I mean, I don't like it. It's overused. I actually do like it a bit. Like, it can be properly used. Like, I remember somebody saying, oh, audiences won't know when to laugh. And I'm like, yeah, that is ridiculous. But then I also see like...
But I should know when to laugh. I should just laugh naturally.
That is true, but it's like you're not watching something in a full theater. And the theater, like, full of people is like the best time to experience something. It gets overused.
But it's kind of like faking a live event.
I agree with you. But the problem is that like the show is edited to include the laugh track. So if you take the major component of it out... it's going to be filled with nothing.
With gaps.
Yeah.
Which would be filled with a laugh track.
If you took out the video that went along with the laugh track,
then it would just flow.
Then it would flow a bit. It'd still be awkward. It'd be choppy. But it would work. But the whole argument of like, oh, you take out the laugh track and it's just so weird. It's like, yeah, that is a central building block of the show. They've made it with a laugh track in mind. And like there are some stuff like when they used like live studio audiences and stuff like that scene. I remember the reason they decided to keep Monica and Chandler together was it was just going to be a gag, but the audience like roared and they went on for like 10 minutes and wouldn't settle down on Friends. And then they're like, oh,
we have something here.
Yeah. And that's why it is. So it's like the whole argument of like, don't include a laugh track. It's like, that is cutting out like the audience of the thing and the live theater aspect of it. And that's why it doesn't work, because it was part of the core from the beginning. So we just got to wait for the next, Office Friends thing. I haven't seen Parks and Rec. Have you?
I watched some of it.
Same.
I remember watching like up to season 3 or 4, and I got caught up, and then I stopped watching it. I don't know. I think it had its funny moments. It was okay, but again, I was watching The Office at the same time, and I was like, bah, Office is better, so I stopped watching it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, like again, I just think that's like a changing media. Is that like the 3-camera sitcom? I think it's just kind of gone.
You don't think there's going to be something that we can't even imagine that like in a few years from now, somebody will like, what if we do it again, but this? What if we do this, but break barriers?
Perfect it? Maybe.
Not perfect it, but they think of like, I don't know, maybe they add a 4th camera or something. But it's just, to me, the reason I don't like it or can't imagine is that it feels too fake. With
3-camera does?
Yeah, it's like I know I'm on a set and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's like watching. It's
but like,
it's live theater.
Do your parents think that? Right, the average person. No, we're gonna notice that it's a set, and I look for like Three's Company watching now. Like I've caught some boom mics getting into the screen. You know what I mean? So like, but that's you and I.
A show you should watch after Three's Company. How far are you into it?
Literally have one more episode.
Oh, really? Yeah. I mean, one that has the same premise and it's way older is Bosom Buddies.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it's with Tom Hanks. And
okay.
And he basically, their apartment gets condemned and they have to move into like an all women's apartment, but like it's an all women's apartment. So they dress up as women. And
do they get caught?
You have to watch the show.
Bosom Buddies. Okay.
Yeah. And it's just, that's the whole thing. And it's like half the time they're like guys. They're just like guys who visit, who are like with
dresses on.
Yeah. Like when they have the dresses on, it's like, oh, we have brothers or whatever.
Oh,
yeah. I've never seen it, but what I would recommend to you is watching Cheers.
I wanted to watch Cheers, but like Rachel kind of like doesn't, so it's like, man, like I don't want to watch it enough to like convince her.
I watched the first 2 episodes.
She did say that she'd be like open to watching The Wire, which I for sure want to rewatch, but I was like, no, we got to watch this in like the winter. I'm not going to watch this in the middle of July.
Yeah.
So
I watched the first 4 episodes of The Wire, and then
it's a great show.
I can't get into it. I know. I watched the first 4 episodes, and then I watched like one of the key episodes, and then I watched the last episode.
Give it another try. Yeah,
I will at some point. I like that I haven't seen The Sopranos. I haven't seen what did we just mention?
Sopranos and The Wire.
The Wire.
Yeah.
That's not really watching it, like watching like a key episode and stuff like. But
So-
I haven't seen Mad Men.
I've seen both of them. I've watched some episodes of Mad Men. I kind of fell out of it into the second season. Whatever.
It's just so boring.
It is pretty boring. I remember it being pretty boring. But I don't want to say like, oh, you're not like a real whatever movie fan, because like I feel like The Godfather. I haven't watched The Godfather. I've tried like 3 or 4 times to watch The Godfather 1. I just can't get into it.
Couldn't get into The Godfather.
I'm gonna try it with my Godfather. With my father-in-law. Because like he loves them.
Are
so
you
it's just, like,
legitimately in contact with your Godfather? Because I'm not in contact with mine at all.
Yeah,
I don't mean that as like a negative. I've seen him like 3 times in my life.
I have 2. I'm definitely in contact with one more than the other.
And he was like, oh,
I just talked to him yesterday morning.
Mm-hmm. He's like, oh, I'm a terrible Godfather. Like I wasn't around. It's like, we had a good upbringing. You're off the hook.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, like
that's what my parents said to because my parents' Godfather's selection was terrible. But
who's your Godfather? Like an uncle?
I can't tell you. They're like not because I can't recall their name.
Wow. Okay.
It might be Brian or something, but like whatever.
Okay.
But like I saw him like a year or so ago at a funeral, and he was like nice guy and stuff like that. But it's like he's not a part of my
life.
Yeah. And I don't mean that negatively. Like I see him, hey, how you doing?
How it worked out, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like, he was said to my mom at one time. He's like, oh, I was a terrible Godfather. It's like, you weren't needed. You know, it's
I suppose, yeah.
But it's like I let him off the hook. You know?
No, I mean, like I have the 2, one from baptism, one from confirmation, and I mean, like for the longest time it was one from.
I didn't have one
baptism.
for confirmation. My sponsor was like my brother.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't.
Because that's just how my family did. The sponsor was like Nick or you.
No, I picked an uncle.
It was like Nick or Alex.
Becomes the Godfather, and then like I spend a lot of time with him, and then like now it's just kind of like shifted as life shifts, and I spend more time with one than the other.
Well, I saw The Godfather when I was 12, both of them, and I'm like, it's so funny to me because it's like Godfather 1 and 2, and Lawrence of Arabia, and Gone with the Wind. I all saw when I was like 12, and I'm like, I get it. The production value of these are incredible. These movies are boring. And I've always had that opinion. And
I read the book. Did you read the book, The Godfather?
No, I have no interest.
So I read the book.
Oh, did you?
I did. So, oh, did you? Yes, I did. I'm not bullshit. Yeah. So I did read it, and I remember like, so I tried.
Have you seen The Offer? About the making of it. It's a mini series about the making of The Godfather.
No,
and it's like as a fictional account.
Wasn't there like
it's on Paramount Plus?
I think I've heard of it, but no.
It's called The Offer.
Yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. But wasn't there like a thing where like not Francis Ford Coppola, but the author Mario Puzo who wrote the book when like after they did The Godfather, it was just like, oh, like if we're gonna do The Godfather 2, we should probably like take a course or like learn how to write a screenplay or like learn how to write for a movie. And like I think they started this course or like opened this book, and it was like, if you want a perfect account of like how a movie should be, like watch The Godfather. And he was like, oh yeah, all right. Like I guess we know what we're doing.
Yeah, you can watch this interview of like Francis Ford Coppola talking about like Megalopolis, his latest movie, and he's won like 6 Academy Awards or something crazy like that, like at least 4 for himself, and like half of those are for writing. And he was just kind of like explained it the same way of like, yeah, you're writing something and you get into it and you're like, this is kind of ridiculous. When we go to the other thing, and then you write that thing and you're like, this is kind of ridiculous. That old thing that I was doing, maybe not as ridiculous. So bad, yeah, and I pick it up and I do it again. And he's like, that's writing. You just like writing and keep writing, and that's it.
The point is, don't stop. You'll find your footing.
Yeah, we just got to wait for millennials to be funny to write something that's like good.
God, but do you think we're going to get it from Gen Z?
I don't like their sense of. I'll tell you what I don't like about them. They do not like. They have, and it's not their fault. They have no frame of reference for anything.
So how do we have frame of reference?
We have frame of reference.
When they don't.
Yeah, we have frame of reference because everything that we did, and I'll attribute this. Oh, that's my. They do that. It's because I bet you it's on TikTok.
The hell is that?
No thanks. Close. Yeah, TikTok does this thing.
Would you just get an ad?
TikTok
Unprovoked?
TikTok turns around like if you have your phone like off, but the app is still open, it will it will turn on every so often and just
like that.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
It is. And that's what they do for viewership. That's why their viewership is one of the tactics why their viewership is so high.
Because it brings you back into it.
Yeah, it will just like turn on. And it's like But
your phone was over there.
Yeah, it was over there, face down, terrified us. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I was like, what the hell? Like, are you getting a call? Your phone is here recording.
Yeah. But yeah, TikTok does this thing where it will just automatically turn on if like you don't completely close the app.
That's
and it will
messed up.
Yes, it is.
The Chinese is
Shu Zhu, if you're listening, don't listen.
Turn it off now.
Yeah. But like, yeah.
So your frame of reference.
So we grew up in the change from the analog era to the digital era, where things
were having dial-up.
Yeah. Where things like were written on books. And then at some point became digitalized to being on the internet.
Yeah.
But there was like television channels, and there were like 3 television channels, and now there's like 100 apps.
Yeah.
You know, there used to be libraries. Now there's just like the internet. Like libraries still exist, but people's main frame of reference is like the internet.
Right.
So they're used to reading and looking at things flat. Everything that they see is delivered to them on a screen, flipping through an algorithm, and it's all presented to them equally. So they have no frame of reference of like one thing being more important than the other. So because of that, there's this weird kind of collective of like, because everything is fed to them in a way, they kind of like act like everybody's in the know about something. Like they don't explain things. They don't give context to
They
something.
just assume that you're in the same world they are.
Because everything is like things weren't exactly contextualized for them. Like our life was completely contextualized. When Community made a reference, they would make like a reference to something from like our childhood or our parents' childhood or like a TV show being on. Yeah. They don't have that. They watch Community, and it's just all these references are like a blank book. They're like the same. They don't have a frame of reference.
But like,
is my
could
point.
That be an age thing? Like it's just like, oh, they don't remember movies from the 80s. They never seen the 80s, or like they didn't.
But that's the problem, is that they never had their own 80s though. They didn't ever get to build up their own frame of reference, their own set of references for something.
Oh, so would you say like an equivalent for us is just like, oh, the 80s, we remember 80s movies from the 80s, TV shows from the 80s or whatever, that theirs would just be like, oh, remember this like popular trend from 10 years ago.
So it's like a good example would be like our parents lived through the 80s.
Right.
We had both movies from the 80s and movies that took place in the 80s.
Made later.
Yeah. And they just...
The 80s was a time.
Yeah. And they are watching both the like documentary footage of the 80s and news clips from the 80s and the movies that were made that we watched from the 80s.
Clips.
And in clips. And that's their frame of reference. There's nothing new on their table. It's just they're looking back on what we already saw that was already made for us, not them.
But those are kind of like our experiences, though.
But they have none of their own, is my point. So because they have none of their own in that regard, everything is seen to them like one-dimensionally. And because of that, because they have no frame of reference, they give no frame of reference. And because they give no frame of reference, they're like very annoying, because it's like, oh, what are you talking about? You know, go look it up yourself. And it's like it's like I don't know what you're talking about, and you're not giving me context for it, so I have to go up and find my own thing. It's just like I get into fights with people.
It's like, to understand you, I have to do research.
Well, it's like the people who are like, oh, what's that reference that you made to this movie? And it's like, go look it up yourself. Google is free. And it's just like, man, I'm asking you.
You're in front of me right now.
Yeah, and it's like on Twitter, I had an argument today of like somebody mentioning that, and I'm like, this is so annoying. And then I like explained it because I'm like, F you.
Pull it up, Jamie.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just basically the thing, is just that our parents had their own set of references. Like they lived through the 80s. Yeah. We had our own like fake set of references of like 80s movies.
We got the jokes.
Yeah. And they have nothing. and they just consume the same thing that we consume, but it's not made for them.
But for them to say like, oh, just look it up, Google's free, is that like just a bad attitude, or just like they don't know what else to say?
It's like those, to circle
like,
back.
Why wouldn't they just explain it to you? It's just like,
because they don't know themselves. It's like
that's like panic mode of like, just Google it.
Well, yeah, it's like they don't truly understand themselves. The thing that, like, to circle back to Big Bang Theory, a lot of people hate the Big Bang Theory because, like, that was the show where it's like the reference was the joke. And that was like the beginning of that, and people said it's like the heat death of the universe, because it's like, if making the reference is the joke, then like
there's no more content to reference.
Yeah, and it's just like a serpent eating its own tail.
Yeah, the snake eating its tail. Yeah,
and I'm saying just that, like, because everything is viewed through a screen now, people have no individualized context of like, this was a book versus this was an event that happened. They just all see it the same way, and because of that, everything is like the same way. It's something that like is an important piece of culture. That's like a movie is treated to them in the same way as like a historical event. And like, because of that,
so strange.
So everything becomes like flattened and normalized, I guess. So it's just kind of, everybody basically becomes a serial killer of like, they have no emotional attachment or individual attachment to anything that happens, because none of it is real.
Okay. So like, when Gen Z, like, let's say, they're like between the ages of like, what's Gen Z now? Like between 10 and 20?
1996 to like 2010.
That's Gen Z?
Yeah.
What's after that? Gen Alpha?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So like,
so which one are we referencing? Z or Alpha?
We're referencing Z.
Oh.
Which is weird because they're only like, we're at the tail end of millennials. They're only like 3 years younger than us. I find that people like younger, and it's weird because
we're almost like a sweet spot, because we know what it's like to dial up and phone numbers, but we saw the transition, but we know what it's like to go outside and exercise.
Think the amount of times a day that I thank my lucky stars that I like know how to do this, that I can like phone up Kojiko and change my dad's bill to work for him in a way that like I could themselves. That's something that nobody else would think of to do. Nobody would think to like pick up a phone number and dial a phone number and
I just
talk
set
to
up my in-laws with a new service provider with Chatter on their phones.
Yeah.
They got new plans, and like I set it up for them online, but we had hiccups, and it's like, okay, we're calling their customer service.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you help me? Oh, yeah, we can help you with that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but it's just like, well, it's just like, oh, it's not working. So what are you going to do? I don't know. It's like, no, call them. They got to have a number.
Yeah,
right?
So we were born at the perfect time because it was in the transition from analog to digital, and because of that, we had to learn how to do things ourselves without our parents really knowing it. Right, and as a result, we were able to like make those mistakes.
Like, oh, this will probably work. It's like, okay, well, I got to look it up anyways.
Yeah, and it's like, well, nobody's there to look over our shoulder or tell us. So, and it's like them. It's the thing that I think of, and the kids are too young now, but it's like when watching a show. My nephew told me the day that like they learned about TV, the way that the Montessori school taught them of like what's about TV is that it was like something on their phone.
What TV is?
Yeah, TV is something on their phone that you turn and you press a button and it's there. And I'm like, contextually, this like is a terrible way of teaching something, because that is like not remotely what TV is. And it's kindergarten, so like who cares? But I was thinking like, okay, TV, like
as you're saying it third party, I'm just like, that's not how you explain what TV is.
Yeah, it's like they were explaining that TV is something that you operate on your phone, and they were explaining it in terms of like operating and switching between apps. Like, yeah, and I'm just kind of like, well, that's not what TV is, because if that's TV, then what's movies? And it's like, well, there's no difference then between, and it's like, that's fine. But the problem is like, you're not teaching them like a television signal goes out that's made at a TV station and stuff like that's still kind of how
there's
it's
a
made.
Cable that comes in your house that's connected to
and you can explain that even in internet terms, like, because people still get internet through cable
Wi-Fi,
and stuff. But it's just kind of like, oh, well, glad to see Montessori private schools are really earning their keep by poorly explaining how television is to kindergartners. Yeah.
By basically like putting a kitty corner to an app.
Yeah. And so it's like we're allowing our children to be dumber because the world has been made like more simplistic, even though like I know vaguely I couldn't design an app. I couldn't make an app.
Sure.
But like I couldn't make an app, but I don't want to. That's an epitome
Besides
of my
the point.
generation. But like these people do not know how to do the things that like we knew how to do. And at this point, it's gotten so complicated that could they even learn, you know? And it's like, maybe.
Frig.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe I was thinking about like Gen Alpha.
Like we flip. I mean, they're too young, but it's like we flip through the. I'll say that about Gen Alpha.
I'll
say that about
so disturbing.
I'll say that I won't say like Gen Z knows how to do that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Gen Alpha for like the kids being taught in kindergarten now.
Sure.
The Gen Z thing of like the being flat, that still sticks.
My cousin was born in 2000, so she'd be Gen Z.
Yeah, and it's like I think what's annoying to me is in a lot of ways people don't give Gen Z or Gen Alpha like credit. Like people say like every generation is a bit better than the one before.
Yeah.
But like. And I'm not worried, like, oh man, it'll change. But like, what irritates me is just like that the job. I constantly worry that people aren't taking the progress that we could have made and like passing it on. It's just kind of like,
here you go, figure it out.
Yeah, I don't know. Like my nephew, not yet. Like he sorta is learning how to control apps and go through the the Roku apps and stuff like that.
Sure.
But but there was a point of like 1 or 2 years ago where I realized that like the generation after us is not going to have our technical knowledge. Like they don't know how to do.
You know what's
stuff,
funny,
and it's not their fault.
Yeah, you're right. It's not their fault. And like I've had what's funny. I've had this conversation before because like a lot of a good handful of the books.
Because I thought that growing up, I'm like, oh, of course there'll be like more tech. If I'm a technical genius, there'll even be greater technical.
Yeah.
genius.
Oh my God, he's gonna be twice as smart as me. Sure. But like a good portion of the books that I read, I like reading classics like literature. As like I've told you before, like my favorite authors, Ernest Hemingway, right? Mm-hmm. When like living in France in the Latin district of Paris, that's the now that I have to say it, I'm forgetting the name. Like the Western canon. Damn it! It's on the tip of my tongue. Basically, there's a lot of artists living in that area at that time, right? In Paris in the 20s, like Picasso was there. A bunch of writers, F. Scott Fitzgerald.
The Enlightenment.
Like, what?
The Enlightenment?
Is it the Enlightenment? Shoot.
It could be at a different time, but
whatever. It's a very specific time. Paris in the 20s, like lots of artists that we know today. The Lost Generation. Yeah. They were the Lost Generation. That's what I was going for. The Lost Generation. They wrote, books, art, visual art, whatever, all this stuff, right? Because why were they called the Lost Generation? Because after World War I, they were kind of like, well, what do we do? Right? Because like things were like good enough that like they could kind of do what they wanted. It was after the war. So like they're trying to like find this new footing of what's life like after this major world war. So they were considered like the Lost Generation, right? Yeah. So I think about that, and that was almost pretty much exactly 100 years ago now, right? Yeah. And it's just kind of like, okay, so here's this Lost Generation, and it's just like, and we got this amazing art. Here we are 100 years later, and you could almost arguably say like a Lost Generation. Do you think we're going to get art that's going to last 100 years from Gen Alpha?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't see it.
The thing that I realize is that we're kind of like running out of, like, we're making less content. Like, we're making more content, but less content that like lasts. Like, there are movies that get dropped into
like junk
streaming
food content.
Yeah, like I feel like I pin it with the arrival of The Rock as like a main action star, because as soon as he makes like San Andreas, and that's a terrible movie, and it opens to like 54 million and is terrible and still makes money, is like with terrible special effects. That like that's the thing of like, oh, somebody figured out how to make terrible movies because we're winking at it. And then, but also make money. And then it was like, to me, after 2015, movies, partly because of that and streaming, movies start to get like less good.
Combination of the two.
Yeah, and you watch a lot of movies now, the special effects are annoyingly worse than they are in like 2005. Like you go back and you watch like...
Tried harder.
Yeah, and it's like, we thought that like, and it's true for some, the special effects of The Day After Tomorrow, the tidal wave, like is still pretty good and
cool
and stuff
scene,
like
yeah.
that. But then like you watch something like made from like this year or last year, like Black Adam has horrid special effects, and you're like, okay, well that's like, you know, a one-off, you know. But now it's like the one-off is like good special effects, where it's like, oh, Dune and Godzilla X Kong have good special effects, but The Fall Guy has terrible special effects and it looks like a streaming movie. Or it's like Mad Max Fury Road has amazing special effects in it.
Right.
But I saw Furiosa, and the special effects, like, it's very obviously green screened at points. So the special effects are worse, even though the movie costs like significantly more. Like Mad Max costs like 150, 160 million. Furiosa costs like 160 to 190 million. Like it cost a lot more money, and it was filmed like digitally on green screen. These Apple TV movies, like you watch Ghosted, it was like, was anybody like, did anybody physically be in the same room while that entire movie was being made? The whole thing is like green screen. They go to like fake locations and stuff. But like back then, people used to like make stuff on location. And it's like, we have to get this shot, so we better be prepared. And then it's like, now it's like, oh, well, we can do it in post.
Fix it in post.
And that's like with a lot of the Marvel movies now. And it's just basically, as time goes on, it's like we're more separated from the art that we're making as we're making it. So I like think to myself, like, God, I better like make it as an artist soon, because I'm like needed. I feel like I can feel the gap where I was supposed to become like a filmmaker. And because that generation hasn't been like replenished yet, they still have like Spielberg making movies in his like 70s and stuff. And he hasn't like lost a step. And it's like the stories he tells are like less interesting, but like it's we're at the point now where it's like 2 years between television seasons. The next season of The Last of Us is going to be 7 episodes, and it's going to cover half of the second game. And it's like, okay, we waited 2 years for 7 episodes. Friends did 22 episodes a season. Year. Yeah. The Office did 22 episodes. Yeah. And they'd be back, and they just like don't do that anymore.
So what's happening?
What's happening is they're hiring like less writers. The creators are getting more powerful, so they want to be like involved, and they want their name on everything. And they're basically, they went to the streamers and got everything that they wanted. So it's kind of like a thing of like some of the creators have too much control. The people who own the content companies were bought out by bigger companies that basically have infinite amounts of money. Like Apple has an infinite amount of money.
Right.
They're a multi-trillion-dollar company. Nothing that, and like any Apple TV show they ever do, could be like something as expensive as For All Mankind or whatever, will ever put a dent in or a noticeable effect in their earnings calls. Jeez. You know, they're just in TV because it's like a thing that they can
burn
do.
Money and not think about it.
Yeah, or like, oh, here's something that can expand. It'll put us in touch with talent, keep us more in touch with Hollywood, and like we'll be able to foster technology for blah, 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 blah. But it's like totally like a fashion show. Like it's not profitable at all. It doesn't make sense. Nobody's going to buy these
Look
clothes.
what we can do.
Yeah. So it's just like Amazon, same thing. It's like if Fallout makes more people stock up for toilet paper, then we'll renew it for like a second season. You know, it's like that. It's this weird thing where it's like the movie success or television show success is attached to subscribers who are already subscribed. So when they're watching a show, it's not individually tied to a show or film success. It's like, well, we think it is, but it's just kind of like a terrible movie comes out, like the Roadhouse remake, which was okay. But it's like, oh, I'm watching that because it's free. It is not something that I would go to the movie theater to see. But Amazon doesn't see it that way. To them, it makes no difference because it's like, well, you're watching Roadhouse. We'll give you more Roadhouse, even though you wouldn't. It's not something that you'd pay for. It doesn't have a lot of value. It's good enough to us. So it's basically we get a rush of content that's like good enough because
keep us in the conversation.
Because of like, I don't want to get into a rant here, but basically because of capitalism, these companies are so large that an individual project, the value of a movie means a lot less. So there isn't going to be a Paramount, we're going bankrupt. Let's give out a handful of money to a bunch of people. One of those movies turns out to be The Godfather, which is what happened in the 70s when Gulf and Western bought them. Now it's like, okay, this tech company, let's say Oracle, is going to buy Larry Ellison is like the fourth richest man. They're not going to buy Paramount. Like his son was going to buy it and then decided not to. But it's like if they were to buy Paramount, like they could lose money for like hundreds of millions for 30 years and it wouldn't make a dent. And that basically devalues the proposition of like making good stuff in the first place. It stops becoming about making good stuff. It's like, oh, let's make a good movie if we can. It's no longer, we need to make good movies or we'll go out of business. It's just not a concern anymore.
Jeez, like too big to fail kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's the issue. Like you have like the people who own Friends. It was made by Warner Brothers, but they don't have a television station, so they sold it to NBC. And those two big companies like worked in concert to like Warner Brothers would develop the show, but they had to have considerations of like we need to have a commercial break at this point, or the advertisers are going to be this, or we're selling to this group of people. And now it's the other way around where the tech companies are entitled of like, we don't need to sell to anybody individually. We can just target that to anybody because we have this information about their phone. Yeah. So it's like you're being told about a show and you're watching it because you have nothing better to do. And that's just kind of what, yeah. And it's just because, again, these companies are so large that the stuff they're making doesn't actually matter anymore. You still get big hits, but it's like you can basically force like the morning show for Apple TV. That's a total money laundering scheme. Like it's not a money laundering scheme, but it's just like not a lot of people actually watch it, but Apple can afford to make the show in a very expensive way, get a lot of guest stars, pay Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston a lot of money, and throw a lot of lavish parties come Emmy season for people to come to a free party and have chips and dip and some beers, and the celebrities will be there because they can afford to pay the celebrities, and we'll watch the show and talk about how great this terrible show is.
And we'll just keep this thing rolling.
And we're going to keep it rolling. And then Emmy season comes along and they get nominated. And it's like, I'm watching the show and it sucks. And and it's like, maybe a few episodes in, it might become watchable and stuff. But because they have like fed it to you, these like sponsored posts and on Instagram and stuff, it's like, are you
tell you it's so good?
And and the people, your friends, have like drank the Kool-Aid because they don't watch the same good stuff you do. It's like, have you seen the morning show yet?
It's amazing.
I'm watching the morning show, and they want to be a part of the conversation. Like they want, you want something to be good when you're watching it. Otherwise, you wasted your time. So it's like you want to be able to tell your friends about a great show. So it's just like companies have gotten better at like brainwashing people into making shows because look how shiny it is. And they figured out how to like game the system. It's like, oh, it's not a lot of people are watching it, but it's winning Emmys. So,
must be good.
Yeah. And it's like, it will never be anywhere close to Friends, that general, but like
nobody's walking around with morning show t-shirts, like Friends t-shirts and sweaters.
But it's because a company got in a position where they could basically afford to pay Jennifer Aniston what she was paid on Friends, even if nobody watches the show. And that's the problem because it's a company not invested in its own product success.
Okay, so we're over an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Give us something to look forward to. Give us a positive.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm still looking forward to The Last of Us season 2, even though it's only 7 episodes long. Okay. I have no interest in the House of the Dragon, so F that. That premieres this Sunday. Points where it flirts with being as good as Game of Thrones, but the premise sucks. The one thing that I'm looking forward to is actually the next thing I'm looking forward to. It's a movie, though. It's not a TV show, so you'll have to say TV show. Is Longlegs, and it's about an FBI agent played by the girl who was in like It Follows and Watcher. If you've seen that, Makeup Monroe. She's kind of like a scream queen.
It's not a sequel to Eight-Legged Freaks.
No, I still haven't seen that movie. But it's a movie that has a cultural footprint, and like movies now just don't have that. Isn't that weird? Like this movie opened.
We both know the movie, but neither of us have seen it.
It opened like it was like number 12 at the box office. I remember like my mom's friends seeing it, and it's like
20 years ago.
Yeah, it opened at number 8 at the box office and made like $3 million. But you reference it, and I remember.
Here we are, 20 years later.
Yeah, and it's like streaming shows aren't like that, but this movie coming out, Longlegs, it's about an FBI agent investigating like a cult serial killer, and played by Nicolas Cage.
And what streaming service is this on?
It's coming to theaters.
Oh, sorry, you said it was a movie.
It's by Neon, the people who distributed Anatomy of a Fall and
nice.
Parasite and stuff. They're just a distributor. I'm not sure.
So it's set up for success.
Yeah. So that's like the next thing that I'm looking forward to. I'm also looking forward to Twisters, but the second trailer for that, it's like too many digital effects. It doesn't look like the 1996 Twister looks more realistic than like this one, which is all. And even though they were like, we filmed on location in Oklahoma during tornado season,
right?
And then you filled it up with a whole bunch of special effects that aren't convincing.
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah. They don't have that. You know what the big problem? If that movie flops, it's because they didn't include Helen Hunt. Like, it's supposed to be a sequel. Everybody thinks it's a remake because nobody from the first movie is in it.
Right.
So, like, that's the problem. Helen Hunt pitched a Twisters sequel, and they just went and made something else. But it's like, if they, like, you have a character who's, like, alive in, like, real life.
That can totally do this.
Yeah, and they just, like, didn't include it, and it's like the reboot syndrome of, like, oh, we're starting from the beginning, ripping it all up and starting again.
Right.
And it's like, that was necessary for Batman after the mythos got so complicated and ridiculous. It was necessary for James Bond because they were 25 movies in. It's not necessary for, like, Halloween, where it's like every once in a while a guy comes back and kills people.
Yeah.
Like, that's the entire premise. Do we really need to start from scratch for that? No.
Yeah, for his origin story.
Or the bullshit where people are like, oh, we're only making a sequel to the good movies in the franchise. It's like, oh, we're making another Terminator movie, but it's a sequel to Terminator 2, even though it's Terminator 6.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
screw other Terminators.
Yeah, it's like, screw the movies that move the plot forward. It's like, you don't think those filmmakers were trying to make good movies too?
Yeah, you
like,
think they're trying to make a shitty movie? No.
It inherently devalues a franchise. But like, yeah, after this...
We're only making sequels to the good ones.
That is legitimately what they
Why
said.
can't they all be good?
Yeah, there's a movie coming out, The Crow, that's a remake of The Crow, and
where
like
the guy actually died, Brandon Lee.
Yeah. And it's like they could have made a sequel,
right?
And because the other sequels were like straight to video, nobody watched them.
Yeah,
and it's like they could have made the first proper theatrical sequel, like Fast and Furious 4. It was like Vin Diesel saying to Paul Walker, "You did 2, I wasn't in 2. I had a cameo in 3, you weren't in 3. This is going to be the first proper sequel that like both of us are doing." But at the same time, they didn't, like, Tokyo Drift still exists in the timeline, so they had to like build toward that, and then it's like richer because of it. And which they touched on in like Fast 6, I think. In 7, and
they explain it. Yeah.
So
they loop it into the story.
Yeah, because everything is like, Han is still alive, so technically it's a prequel. So we got to fix this. But it makes the universe feel bigger.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's just annoying now that like Microsoft is coming out with like, they left Gears of War 5 on a cliffhanger, and their next Gears of War game is a prequel
in like 5 years.
And it's like, okay, well, games take 4 years to develop now, so like this game won't come out for like 3 years now because games are announced and then don't come out for 3 years. And then it's like, by the time they get to Gears 6, they'll probably reboot the whole thing rather than...
It's been so long.
Yeah, it's so annoying. Like, learn how to count, Microsoft. Like, yeah. What are you looking forward to? Like, is there anything...
Probably going to see Twisters with my dad because we were fans from back in the day.
Yeah.
Like we had it on VHS.
Yeah. I watched it on TV. It's still like
holds up.
The music is like gets you amped up.
Yeah. I don't know what I'm looking forward to exactly. No, I don't know. I've been working on other stuff. But honestly, I'm not going to lie, listening to your podcast like keeps me in the loop.
Yeah.
So like, I just know Twisters because that's on the horizon. But like, as you're explaining it in earlier episodes of your podcast, like you're just like, things suck right now. Like this is like what's on right now, what's about to come. Like it doesn't look good. And I'm like,
really?
Yeah. Is that really what's going on? Like, because I know that like what you're talking about, it's legit. So I'm just like, that kind of sounds like it sucks.
Yeah. I mean, I feel bad now because I'm like, I have such a harsher like criticism of movies because like it's funny, you watch the movies from the 2000s now and they're actually like pretty good, but at the time they were like ravaged by like Rotten Tomatoes and critics, and part of that is just like a generational thing of critics being snobby. But like the annoying thing is that like the standard is below that now, and part of it is like the actors and writers struck for like 3 months or whatever, so nothing got made. But I mean, I'm looking forward to Trap, the M. Night Shyamalan film, even though it stars Josh Hartnett. The send-up of that movie is that they go to a concert, think like Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga. Yeah. And Josh Hartnett takes his daughter and he goes to the bathroom and then he speaks to the guard, and the guard said, "What's going on here? I noticed people installing cameras. What's going on?" And he says to Josh Hartnett, "You know the butcher, like the serial killer? He's I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but the guy who like chops people up. The police got a tip that he's going to be at this concert, and they've set a trap for him to find out." And then Josh Hartnett goes into the bathroom, turns on his phone, and he has somebody like captive in his basement, and he's the serial killer who was just told, who brought his daughter there.
That sounds cool.
So it's like, how is he going to get out of this trap? And that's
because it's just been revealed that like there is a trap for him.
Yeah, and people were like, "Oh, that spoils the movie," and it's like it doesn't.
No, that's the movie.
Yeah. The whole send up is that it is a
the
trap.
movie isn't the trap; it's him getting out of the trap.
Yeah. Is that
neat.
Because you see it, and it's
that sounds cool.
You watch the trailer, and like at the point he's like, "Somebody's the butcher," and then you're like, "Well, obviously it's Josh Hartnett." And then the movie reveals right away. It's like, "Oh, it's Josh Hartnett."
Yeah, I like those movies where it's like totally reveals all of your your assumptions, and you're like, "Wait, so what happens now?"
Yeah. So I'm like, that just got moved up to August 2nd from August 9th, which was the same release date that Signs had 22 years ago.
We can go see that on Cheap Night.
Yeah. Let's go see it.
Tune in for that. In August.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
and
end it
thanks for
there.
giving me my episode early.
FilmGamer.com.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show, Eric.